I never thought I'd be the guy watching a SWAT team crash a wedding with a helicopter hovering overhead, but there I was, sipping my coffee, watching pure chaos unfold. Guests in expensive suits were running like they were in an action movie, the bride was crying into her $10,000 dress, and Karen, the woman responsible for this whole mess, was screaming at a federal agent, demanding to speak to the manager of the FBI. What made it even better? This was all happening on my land. She had no idea I was a federal agent, and she had no idea this was coming. But before we get to that, let me tell you how we got here. Karen was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, a woman who ruled the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. She issued fines for the smallest infractions, mailboxes being too slightly off-center, lawns being too aggressively green, and trash cans being left out longer than exactly 4 minutes after pickup. She wasn't just power-hungry, she thrived on making people's lives miserable. I was lucky. I lived just outside the HOA's reach, meaning Karen had no actual control over me. But that didn't stop her from trying. She once tried to fine me for parking my own car in my own driveway, citing an unwritten community aesthetic clause. I laughed, ignored her, and thought that would be the end of it. I underestimated her pettiness. It all started at the local coffee shop, where I overheard Karen bragging about planning the event of the decade. She was talking loudly, making sure everyone within a 10-mile radius knew she was in charge of her daughter's wedding. She went on and on about how she wasn't going to waste money on an expensive venue when she had access to perfectly good community land. My ears perked up. There was no such thing as community land in this area, just private property. My private property. As she listed off the plans, the massive tent setup, the catered alcohol service, the imported decorations from Italy, it dawned on me. Karen wasn't just throwing a wedding, she was throwing a wedding on my land. Without asking. Without permission. Like she owned the place. I could have confronted her right then and there. I could have walked up to her, pulled out the property deed, and shut this nonsense down immediately. But where's the fun in that? Karen had spent years making people's lives miserable with her power-tripping antics. This was my opportunity to watch her hoist herself by her own petard, and I wasn't about to waste it. The next step was gathering intel. I casually walked by her house later that week and saw her full wedding planning board through the window, color-coded schedules, vendor lists, seating arrangements. It was like a war map, and my land was ground zero. She was so confident in her control over the neighborhood that she didn't even think twice about it. That's when I realized I had something better than just telling her off. I had the legal upper hand, and I had my job. Because you see, while Karen was busy being an HOA tyrant, I was busy being a federal agent. And as a federal agent, I knew that what she was about to do was not just morally wrong. It was legally disastrous. I started making calls. First, I contacted the ATF about the alcohol situation. Karen had arranged for alcohol sales at the wedding, a cash bar, meaning she was about to sell alcohol without a permit. That alone was enough to get a raid organized, but then I dug deeper. Her brother-in-law, who was handling the liquor, had a history of selling bootlegged alcohol. That meant we weren't just looking at a permit issue, we were looking at felony charges. Oh, and let's not forget the trespassing. Legally speaking, the second she and her guests stepped onto my land without permission, they were all committing a crime. I set the pieces in motion, made sure everything was in place, and then I sat back and waited. The week leading up to the wedding was a spectacle. Karen ran the neighborhood like a dictator on a caffeine high, barking orders, making ridiculous demands, and acting like she was planning a royal coronation. She had construction crews setting up massive tents, catering services hauling in truckloads of food, and rental companies delivering enough chairs and tables to seat a small country. And every single one of those things was being placed on my land. I watched it all unfold from my back porch, sipping my coffee, resisting the urge to wave. It was almost too easy. Then came the wedding day. Guests arrived in droves, stepping onto my property in their designer dresses and overpriced tuxedos, completely unaware they were trespassing on federal land. Karen was in full form, soaking in the attention, acting as if she had personally built this land from scratch. The ceremony began, the music swelled, the bride and groom exchanged vows, and then, the toast. Karen took center stage, raising her glass, beaming with pride as she prepared to deliver a speech about how her meticulous planning had led to this perfect day. She barely got through the first sentence before the sirens started. The first wave came fast. ATF agents swarming the liquor stands, shutting them down on the spot. The second wave was the police, blocking off the exits, informing guests that they were, in fact, trespassing. And then, the piece de resistance, a helicopter hovering overhead, shining a spotlight right onto the main tent. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed, some bolted for the parking lot, others stood frozen in confusion. The groom's side of the family tried to play it cool, but Karen? Karen was losing her mind. She marched straight up to the nearest federal agent and, in true Karen fashion, demanded to speak to a manager. "I'll have you know I am the HOA president," she shrieked, as if that meant anything in this situation. The agent, unfazed, handed her a legal notice detailing the charges: trespassing, illegal alcohol sales, and conspiracy to distribute unlicensed liquor. Karen's face went from rage to confusion to horror in a matter of seconds. She turned to me, finally realizing that I had been standing there the whole time, arms crossed, watching the entire show. "You did this," she screeched. "I just took a sip of my coffee." "You did this," I corrected. "I just let you." And just like that, the HOA queen was dethroned. The wedding day had arrived, and the air was filled with the kind of energy that only comes from an event where half the people are pretending to like each other. Cars lined up along the neighborhood streets, spilling over into driveways that weren't theirs. Guests, dressed in overpriced suits and dresses, strutted towards the massive white tents that had been set up on my land like they were walking a red carpet. It was almost impressive how oblivious they were. Karen, in her usual dictator mode, was barking orders at vendors, making last-minute changes like she was some kind of event-planning genius. A caterer was nearly in tears as Karen berated her over the appetizer arrangement. I said symmetrical, not asymmetrical. Do you know what symmetry is? The poor woman just nodded while Karen sighed dramatically. Honestly, you people are so unprofessional. You should be grateful I'm even letting you work here. I watched the spectacle unfold from my porch, sipping my coffee like it was just another Saturday. The best part? No one had even noticed me. They were too busy fawning over Karen, complimenting her on such a stunning venue and her generosity in letting everyone use such a beautiful piece of land. She didn't correct them, of course. She basked in the praise, acting like she had personally handcrafted the earth beneath their feet. The bride and groom arrived shortly after, looking nervous but happy. The bride, Karen's daughter, seemed like a decent person, definitely not as high-strung as her mother, but unfortunately, she was caught in the crossfire of what was about to happen. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Then I remembered she had to know, on some level, that this was all illegal. Ignorance wasn't an excuse. As the guests settled in, the real trouble began. The open bar was up and running, manned by Karen's brother-in-law, a man with the permanent expression of someone who thought rules didn't apply to him. He was pouring drinks without checking IDs, slipping extra shots to guests who requested them, and worst of all, charging cash under the table. I caught glimpses of him stuffing wads of cash into his pocket, smirking like he had just pulled off the biggest scam of his life. Little did he know, ATF agents were already on their way. The ceremony itself went as expected, long-winded, full of dramatic speeches, and interrupted only by Karen reminding everyone that none of this would be possible without her. It was actually impressive how she managed to insert herself into every single moment. Even when the groom's mother tried to say a few words, Karen somehow turned it into a story about her own wedding, making the entire thing about herself. Then came the toast. Karen stood up, beaming with self-importance, raising her glass as the crowd quieted. "I just want to take a moment to say how incredible today has been," she said, her voice full of false humility. "It takes a lot of hard work, dedication, and, honestly, a real vision to pull off something like this. And I think we can all agree I did it beautifully." People clapped politely, some more enthusiastically than others. The bride and groom exchanged a glance, clearly tired of Karen making their wedding about her, but they stayed silent. That's when the first sirens blared. At first, people thought it was just a coincidence, a random police car passing through. But then, one after another, black SUVs pulled up, flashing lights bouncing off the pristine white tent. A helicopter hovered overhead, shining a bright light down onto the wedding party. Confusion spread like wildfire. Guests looked around, unsure of what was happening, murmurs turning into full-blown panic. Then, the ATF agents stepped onto the property, moving in like clockwork. Karen's brother-in-law was the first to realize what was happening. He tried to casually step away from the bar, but 2 agents were already on him. "Sir, put your hands where we can see them," one of them commanded. His face turned white as they reached for the cash in his pocket. "Selling alcohol without a license? That's a serious offense." Karen, still oblivious, stomped over. "Excuse me, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded. One of the officers turned to her. "Ma'am, this property is private land, and you are currently hosting an illegal event with unauthorized alcohol sales." Karen scoffed. "This is community property," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "No, ma'am. It's private land," the officer corrected. "And the owner has reported unlawful activity taking place here." Karen's face twisted in confusion. "That's ridiculous." "Who would?" she froze. Her eyes locked onto mine, standing just a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the entire thing unfold. I gave her a small wave. "Hey, Karen." Her face contorted with rage. "You," she hissed. "Me," I agreed. "This is your fault," she screeched, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. I shrugged. "I mean, you did trespass onto my land and sell alcohol without a license. I just let the professionals handle it." That's when things went from bad to worse for her. The police started informing guests that they were, in fact, trespassing. The mother of the groom burst into tears. The bride looked like she wanted to disappear. A few guests tried to play dumb, asking, "Wait, this wasn't a legit venue?" And then Karen did the most Karen thing possible. She stormed up to the lead ATF agent, hands on her hips, chin raised. "I demand to speak to the manager of the FBI." The agent just blinked at her. "Ma'am, that's not a thing." "Well, it should be," she snapped. "I have rights. You can't just barge in here and ruin my daughter's wedding." "Ma'am, you are trespassing," the officer said for the 3rd time. Karen crossed her arms. "I am the HOA president." "I don't care," the officer deadpanned. At that moment, Karen's husband, who had been trying to avoid attention, was spotted by another agent. Turns out, he had some outstanding fraud charges that finally caught up with him. "Sir, we have a warrant for your arrest," the agent said, stepping forward. "What? No, this is a mistake," he stammered. Karen turned to him, eyes wide. "Wait, what?" Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." "Oh my God, this is a nightmare!" Karen shrieked, spinning in circles like she was looking for an emergency exit from reality. The guests were fleeing at this point, running towards their cars, desperate to get away from whatever was unfolding. A few people tried to pretend they weren't associated with the event, slipping away into the night. The bride, bless her heart, just shook her head in disbelief. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" she whispered. Karen didn't answer. She was too busy trying to argue with the police, the ATF, and anyone who would listen. I just took another sip of my coffee, watching it all go down. It was better than any reality show. And the best part? The night was only getting started. The aftermath of the wedding raid was nothing short of legendary. The entire neighborhood was buzzing with rumors, half-truths, and outright lies, most of them spread by Karen herself. According to her version of events, the government had unfairly targeted her, she had been set up by jealous neighbors, and, of course, I was the mastermind behind her downfall. That last part was at least partially true, but I had simply given her the rope. She did all the tying and hanging on her own. The first few days after the fiasco, Karen was uncharacteristically quiet. No surprise there. With her husband under investigation for fraud and her brother-in-law facing charges for illegally selling alcohol, she had her hands full with lawyers, court dates, and trying to maintain whatever was left of her reputation. But Karen was nothing if not persistent. By the end of the week, she emerged from hiding, marching up and down the neighborhood, knocking on doors, and desperately trying to spin the situation in her favor. She went door to door, insisting she had been a victim, that I had planted the police at her wedding to ruin her daughter's special day. She even tried to convince people that the ATF had no authority to raid a private family gathering, completely ignoring the fact that it had been an illegal operation held on my land. Most people humored her, nodding along, pretending to sympathize, but behind closed doors, they were laughing. The great HOA queen had finally been dethroned, and no one was sad about it. Then she made her next mistake. She tried to sue me. A few weeks after the disaster, I received an official-looking letter from a lawyer's office claiming I had willfully and maliciously disrupted a wedding and caused Karen and her family severe emotional distress. The letter demanded financial compensation for irreparable reputational harm, and even tried to argue that I was responsible for the arrest of her husband and brother-in-law. I nearly laughed out loud reading it. I didn't even have to get a lawyer involved. I simply took the letter down to the county records office, pulled up the official property map, and highlighted the clear boundary lines that proved the land in question was legally mine. Then I sent a polite but firm response, attaching a copy of the police reports, the ATF's findings, and, just for fun, a printout of Karen's own social media posts where she had bragged about using the land without permission. That was the end of that lawsuit. Unfortunately for Karen, that wasn't the end of her problems. With her husband's fraud case making headlines in local news, the HOA members started asking questions about where their money had been going. As it turned out, Karen had been dipping into HOA funds for years. She had used community money to pay for personal landscaping, home renovations, and, most outrageously, deposits for her daughter's wedding expenses. That last revelation hit the neighborhood like a bombshell. People who had once tolerated her nonsense were now livid, realizing they had been paying into an HOA fund that Karen had been treating like her personal piggy bank. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Normally, these meetings were poorly attended, with only a handful of members showing up, but this time, nearly everyone in the neighborhood crammed into the community center. Karen, in typical Karen fashion, showed up acting as if she still had control, standing at the front of the room with her usual smug confidence. That confidence shattered within minutes. One by one, people came forward with complaints, grievances, and accusations. They demanded to know where their money had gone. They brought up the wedding disaster, the illegal alcohol sales, the fines Karen had handed out for ridiculous reasons. Some even admitted they had paid extra fees that had mysteriously never been documented. The final nail in the coffin was when someone, probably one of the more tech-savvy neighbors, pulled up bank statements showing HOA funds being transferred into Karen's personal account. Karen's excuses started strong, but they fell apart quickly. She tried blaming clerical errors, then overzealous bookkeeping, then me, claiming this was all part of my ongoing vendetta against her. But no one was buying it anymore. A vote was called. It wasn't even close. Karen was officially removed as HOA president, effective immediately. She didn't take it well. She stormed out of the meeting, screaming about lawsuits, threatening to take everyone down with her. But the reality was, she was finished. Her power was gone, her influence destroyed, and within days, she and her family were hit with multiple lawsuits. Not from me, but from the very people she had spent years terrorizing. Meanwhile, I was enjoying the peace and quiet of a Karen-free existence. But I wasn't quite done yet. I had one final move left to make. With Karen no longer in charge, the HOA started making major changes, rolling back some of the absurd rules she had put in place. But my personal favorite change? The HOA board voted to sell off some of the community-owned land to cover the financial losses Karen had caused. I made an offer on a small but significant piece of land, one located directly next to Karen's house. A month later, after all the paperwork was finalized, construction crews arrived. Karen, still reeling from her fall from grace, came outside, hands on her hips, demanding to know what was happening. I stepped out, grinning. "Hey Karen," I said cheerfully. "I bought this lot." Her face paled. "You what?" "Oh yeah. I figured, since you liked planning events on my land so much, I should return the favor." She glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What are you doing with it?" I let the suspense build for a moment before casually saying, "Turning it into a dog park." The color drained from her face. Karen hated dogs. She had spent years trying to keep pets out of the neighborhood, enforcing ridiculous rules about noise levels, leash lengths, and even the appropriate size of backyard dog houses. And now, right next to her home, she was going to have a fully operational dog park, complete with agility courses, a water play area, and a section specifically for large, loud breed. "You can't do that," she whispered, as if she couldn't even process the horror of it. I shrugged. "I own the land. No HOA restrictions." For the first time in all the years I had known Karen, she was truly, genuinely speechless. She just stood there, blinking, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. The dog park opened a few months later. It was an instant hit with the community. People brought their dogs every day, kids played, laughter filled the air. And Karen? She stayed locked inside her house, peeking through the curtains, watching in horror as her worst nightmare unfolded in real time. Every once in a while, I'd catch her outside, glaring at me from her porch as I sat in my yard, sipping my coffee, enjoying the beautiful sound of barking dogs and happy people. Life was good.